and welcome everyone all around the world. I really appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedules to participate in this amazing WSG forum. And I have to say that over the last few weeks of working with the WSG team, I have been super impressed with the professionalism and the platform that you have built. WSG has literally built a virtual law firm that's global, and it's up and ready well before the COVID crisis. So you're all in a much better position than so many other people. Today, I'd like to cover 3 areas with you that will have an impact on your practice, both in the here and now and in the future. So I'd like to start with some of the biggest technologies that are going to shape our world in the future. Then go back a little bit to the here and now on what is changing for us today and what this will mean to your everyday lives from both a business perspective, a personal perspective, and also from your client's perspective. And then go into a little bit of some of the brand new jobs of the future. So let me start with what I think is the most important technology that's going to impact absolutely every single person and every single business on this planet, and it is artificial intelligence. And AI encompasses so many different things. You've probably heard terms like machine learning and deep learning. These are techniques for teaching AIs, but that's just the start of it. We're talking about natural language processing, whether it be interpreting text or human voice. We're talking about contextual awareness, things like chatbots, virtual digital assistants, smart robots, and driverless cars, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. One of the things that AI is absolutely fantastic at is crunching huge amounts of data. I'm talking terabytes and beyond. More data than a human could possibly read in a lifetime, but distilling it in a matter of seconds. When you combine those two together, then you start to get some really interesting results and have the ability to pick out patterns that may not be intuitive if you're just looking at little discrete data sets. But there's one more factor that's going to have a big influence on artificial intelligence, and that is recent developments in quantum computing. Now, I'm not going to get real technical on you and take you deep into the world of quantum physics because we'd be here for the whole presentation. But let me say, it is a weird and wonderful science that is actually real. In Google's AI lab last year, they started to experiment with some quantum chips. And what they found was that they were experiencing computing power not growing at an exponential rate as we've been accustomed to with Moore's law, but at a double exponential rate. In other words, going so fast that the computers in 5 to 10 years from now will be radically different than the kind of computing that we are accustomed to today if all the experiments that we're looking at right now continue to bear fruition. And what does that mean for artificial intelligence? Well, right now, I'd say it's about equivalent in intelligence to maybe a 2-year-old. But if you combine AI, big data, and quantum computing, we may start to see AIs that actually have the ability to have what we would call general intelligence, very much like a human, and maybe even go beyond humans. And that has a huge range of implications. Another technology that is going to be a big, big game changer are nanobots. And I'm talking about teeny, 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 tiny, microscopic robots. Now, this is just a cool graphic that I'm using. It's not an actual robot, but all around the world, there are research labs that have been experimenting already with nanobots. One in particular is a collaboration that started in the I'd say 2010s, mid-20s, and they were looking at ways of using nanobots to fight cancer. So it was an institute in China along with Arizona State University, and they designed a nanobot that they actually were able to inject into living mice that was able to detect the proteins of certain types of cancers. And when it detected this protein, it would unfurl and inject a drug that was essentially a very targeted blood clotting drug that stopped the tumor growing right in its tracks. Now, this has very profound implications, especially in the world where we've got coronavirus, which is a microscopic virus that is living inside cells and is very, very hard to get to. If coronavirus had come 10 years from now when nanobots were mainstream, we'd probably have a cure already. But this is going to be a very, very big, new, game-changing technology in new area for your legal practices. The future of health is really exciting. It's not just nanobots. We're also talking about stem cells, regenerative medicine. Some of you may have even heard about recent discoveries and experiments where researchers have designed bioprinted, that is 3D printed, little miniature organs, a little miniature heart in one instance out of Israel that is alive and beating, and it was based on using stem cells. Another major technology is genetic engineering, and there is so much to say about it. But if you start to combine genetic engineering and artificial intelligence and nanobots and all the rest, what we could end up with is very, very precise medicine and healthcare that as soon as we start to have the first signs of disease inside of our bodies, these little nanobots may be able to go in and fix it before it becomes a disease. But it becomes even crazier and wilder than that too. There are already experiments where scientists in all kinds of labs around the world have been looking at the possibility of manipulating genes to reverse aging. So can you imagine going backwards in age? Well, at the Salk University, or Salk Institute rather, in 2018, they did exactly that with a mouse that had this rapid aging disease called progeria. Can you imagine if we were able to find the right gene that controls aging? And a lot of scientists believe that this will happen within the next 10, 15, 20 years. We might have very, very extended lifespans. Can you imagine what it would be like if you were able to live healthily, happily, and at a body age of your choice for 400 years? Or what about 800 years? Can you imagine working for 800 years? Can you imagine being married for 800 years? Forget about retirement at 55, 60, even 70 years old. You're not going to be able to fund 800 years worth of living in that short amount of time. We're going to have a very, very different society, and there will be a lot of implications for the legal industry in this. One of them that may or may not impact some of your firms, but it will certainly impact some of your clients, has to do with inheritance in the property market and how wealth passes from one generation to another. our society is about to change radically. And as if that wasn't enough, then we have space travel. And gosh, that sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? Well, guess what? It's not science fiction anymore. The reason that space travel, real space travel, is becoming a reality is that we now have reusable rockets. So if you can imagine that we had airplanes that you can only use one time and then have to throw away, air travel would have been super duper expensive. But right now we have private industry that are building reusable rockets. And in fact, in a recent announcement, Elon Musk was talking about sending a manned mission to Mars in 2024 and having a fleet of 1,000 of his starships and having a colony self-sustaining on Mars by the year 2050. Wow, is that ever going to open up brand new legal areas? Imagine the complex regulations and laws that are going to apply to actually establishing colonies in outer space. What kind of jurisdiction will countries have over private enterprises that have established extraterrestrial colonies? There are going to be all kinds of new laws and regulations and tons of new jobs in the area of space travel. But we can't ignore what's happening now with COVID. The changes that are happening on a daily basis are just astounding. We are in a constant state of flux. It has absolutely put us full bore into the digital age. And it's not going to change anytime in the near future. So let me go through a couple of the near impacts. One, I think that remote working is here to stay. First of all, we still don't have a cure for coronavirus. And until we do, it's not going to be safe to go back to the office with masses of people. And I'm coming to you live from Sydney, Australia. And I can say here in Australia, in the state of Victoria, and particularly the city of Melbourne, there's a lockdown. You can't even leave your house at certain times. After 9 p.m. and between 5 a.m., you must stay at home. Remote working is something that every company around the world is starting to really invest in. If they weren't doing it before COVID, they are definitely doing it now. And I'd be very surprised if any of you are actually in an office. Some of you may be, but most of you are probably taking part in this session from your home office. And there are a lot of implications to people working from home. One is that in your home, you will need to have the right kind of office setup. You'll need to have an ergonomic desk, a big computer screen, very high internet bandwidth, and it may be that your company ends up paying for some of these things. And even as we start going back into the office, it's not going to be all at once. We're likely to see a staggered return into the office with clusters of different groups. And that makes sense. So let's say you might have a company and you start taking in some of your IT staff right away, make sure it's safe. So you've got a quarantine, if you like, around the people that are coming back into your office. And then you might take another group and another group and another group. This is only the beginning of the ramifications. COVID is also having already a profound impact on businesses and the commercial property that they are leasing for their organization. In the retail sector, it has completely decimated all kinds of companies. And even for people that will continue to work in the city, one of the things that we need to think about is what kind of amenities will staff workers have when a lot of small businesses are no longer there. Your local coffee shop may not be there to go to. And there are a lot of implications on this as well. and especially when it comes to the leases and contractual obligations for all of these commercial properties. One of the ways that we are using to try to keep all of us safe, whether it be in a supermarket, a hospital, an office building, or anywhere else, are robotic technologies. This example happens to come out of Thailand, but there are lots of robots that are disinfectant robots. There's two ways of doing it. One is with ultraviolet light, the other is with spraying disinfectants. I prefer UV light because it's able to get into all the nooks and crannies. There are a lot of companies that are starting to design robots in this sector. Some are completely autonomous and others are manually controlled. There's also a brand new door that I saw a couple of days ago that is literally a UV disinfectant door that you walk through as you walk into the office. We're also going to see a move back to onshore manufacturing. I know here in Australia, where I am, there are a lot of supplies that have simply just not been available for extended periods of time. I went shopping today and I've been trying to buy a particular good for the past 6 months, and it is nowhere in sight, and it's not the only thing. Now, when it comes to going back to onshore manufacturing, one of the technologies that's going to be really important is 3D printing. And what you may not know about 3D printing right now is that it's not just plasticky stuff that you print. You can print with metals and multi-materials. There are even 3D printers that are able to manufacture entire homes and offices. They literally build them with construction refuse. There are 3D printers that can actually print real food. There are 3D printers that are bioprinters, like I had mentioned before, that may someday replace having to get a human or organ transplant because it'll be grown from your own stem cells. But this has a lot of ramifications. There are also printers that have been invented but not really rolled out yet that are able to print at an organic level. So if you can imagine that you've got a pharmaceutical company and it's having supply chain issues in getting their products to different countries around the world because of all kinds of problems related to COVID, what if they just sent a CAD file, the blueprints for the drug that they're manufacturing, to their local office and print it locally? This is just the tip of the iceberg. And again, brand new technology, lots of legal implications. Now, speaking about supply chains, we can't ignore what's happening with aviation. It has absolutely been decimated by COVID. And frankly, there are a lot of pilots and crew that have either been laid off already or been furloughed. And I think it's going to take a very, very long time to recover from this. Many of you, if not all of you, are probably accustomed to traveling as part of your job. But instead, we're doing video conferences. I usually travel all around the world, and I've been stuck doing things at home because of COVID. Now, once we start getting air travel back happening again, I think one of the ways that we'll be successful at doing it is if we reconfigure the planes so that they're carrying a lot of cargo and the passenger compartment is made smaller and maybe only comprises like a business class or a first class, and the rest of it is cargo. That might be one way for the airline industry to start rebooting itself. But what happens with all these pilots and also in the cruise ship industry? Well, if we end up going into outer space, like it looks like we're starting to do, these people have the right skill sets to be able to do that too. And COVID is absolutely accelerating changes to the legal profession. And luckily for you, WSG was already ahead of the curve because everything that was analog before needs to be in digital format now. And I think it's really amazing that all of you, in conjunction with World Services Group, have put together a global COVID task force that is able to take on any of the challenges your clients face anywhere in the world. One thing's for sure, we are in an economic recession. Here in Australia, it's official for the first time in 30 years, and we may very well be heading into a depression. It is really not a good situation until we actually get a cure that is rolled out to billions of people. We're in serious danger. And some optimistic forecasters believe that it will be about 2023 before we get back to a semblance of normal. But it could be 2025 or 2030. It really will depend on when we start to find a cure for COVID. There are a lot of wild cards here. So what kind of jobs can we look forward to in the future? Well, there will be a lot of new jobs. A lot of what happens will, of course, depend on what happens with this pandemic. But let me just share with you a couple of ideas for things that will impact your law firms and practices. One of the brand new jobs that we will see comes out of artificial intelligence, and it has to do with training AIs and teaching them to be ethical. Because one of the ways that you train AI is with big data sets, but inherent in these data sets are all kinds of social biases, prejudices, and just flat out wrong data. So one of the new kinds of jobs that's out there, and people are already being hired for this, is something called reinforcement learning, where humans go in with hooks that are put into the AI to help the AI learn what's right and what's wrong. Ethics is another really important aspect of deploying AI, and it hasn't been thought about or talked about in great detail yet, but this is a really big legal area. So imagine driverless cars. That's actually a robot driving your car. If you think about the ethical implications of an unavoidable accident, then you can start to understand where some of your new practice areas might be in this whole area of AI and ethics and training. And the other thing to note is that every single industry in the world is going to be looking for people with AI expertise. So you're going to need to be able to attract people that have a very good grasp of AI. They may not have to be AI programmers or designers, but they need to be digitally literate when it comes to working with AI. Now, with any technology, there's always a good and a bad side, and AI is no different. Some of you may have heard of this already. I don't know if you have. It's called deepfakes. Deepfake is an artificial intelligence technique that allows someone to take a video of you or me or anyone else and literally superimpose somebody else's face on a video, take my voice and make me say things that I'm not saying through a text editor of all things. You can change something that I say, for instance, privacy is important, and make me say things like privacy doesn't matter, just through a text editor. And on the video, my lips will move in the same way that accompany my words. So one of the new jobs that we're going to see is something that I'm calling a reality confirmer. And there are some real implications here for companies as well, and new legal practice areas. So many of you are involved in mergers and acquisitions. Imagine if the video stream that you use on an everyday basis to talk to your coworkers has been hacked, and you think you're talking to your chief operating officer or your CFO, and he or she tells you sensitive information about a merger or acquisition and is asking you questions, and it looks like that person, it sounds like that person, and in the background it looks like their home office or their real office, but it's actually a hacker. Who is going to be responsible for the disclosure of market information before it's actually supposed to be announced? Is it the person who's been tricked by the hacker? Is it the video conferencing company that was hacked? Is it the cyber criminal? Is it someone else? This is going to end up as a new legal area. It has not happened yet, but within the next 2 or 3 years, I'm thinking it probably will happen because there's money to be made out of it, and that's where hackers go. Another thing that we're going to see in terms of new jobs is what I'm calling a privacy guardian. One of the things that has been happening over the last couple of decades is that companies are starting to collect more and more and more information about all of us, and not only collect it, but there are also cyber criminals and other organizations that aggregate this data and then sell it to third parties. And our privacy is actually quite important. It's not about what you have to hide, it's about what you want to keep private. And when it comes to the legal area, one of the areas that I think your firms will need to give advice to your clients about is data collection, how it's stored, and actually whether they need all of the information that they're asking their clients to provide to them. Because there are some very serious implications for privacy breaches. In Europe, the GDPR laws were passed, and I'm not going to explain that to you because I think being attorneys, most of you already know what GDPR is, but the fines are absolutely massive. And by the way, privacy guardians won't just be in the corporate realm. I think they'll be in the private realm. So if somebody has taken your reputation and smeared it, you might hire a privacy guardian to go fix things up for you and put your reputation back intact. Another thing that we're going to see in the corporate area is a change to human resources. It's still going to be HR, but it might very well stand for the head of human and robot orchestration. And when I say robot, I don't mean just physical robots. I'm talking about artificial intelligence as well as physical robots. And not only that, with the advent of COVID, we're going to see another new realm, and that has to do with human wellness, because it's going to be an extremely important responsibility of companies to keep their staff safe in the middle of this pandemic, especially if they're returning to work in the office. Another new job of the future will involve integrating all kinds of different transportation modes, whether we're talking about the kinds of cars and buses and trains that we have today, brand new driverless cars, airplanes, flying taxis. And that sounds really science fiction, but in California, just as one example, Uber Elevate is a project that my colleagues in California were telling me just 2 days ago, still looks like it's going to be on track for 2023 to start rolling out pilots. And they're happening in 3 different cities, in Dallas, Fort Worth, in Los Angeles, and in Australia, they picked Melbourne, although with all the lockdowns in Melbourne, I don't think things are proceeding too quickly over there. And then, of course, there's this new technology called Hyperloops, which some of you might have heard about. This can be thought of as a super, super, super duper fast train. And it has the potential to cut down travel time from many hours to just a couple of minutes, making it possible to have people live in regional areas and get to downtown or CBD areas in 10 or 12 minutes. I haven't heard a lot about Hyperloops since COVID has happened, but there was a lot of things happening right towards the end of last year. And then, of course, we have space travel, and we're going to need to integrate all these modes of transport. And there'll be a lot of other implications as well, including things like black boxes if something goes wrong, you name it, all kinds of new jobs and new regulations. So going into the future, what's going to happen to us humans? Are we going to take technology into our bodies? Will we end up looking like this picture I'm showing you? Part human, part machine? Well, the answer is maybe. There already are people who have taken tech into their bodies. Where I think it might start to go mainstream, and this has been in the works for a number of years now, is something called smart contacts, where literally you have a contact lens that you put into your eyes, and instead of looking at a computer screen, you actually have an augmented reality projection, and you can see things that are literally showing as a mixed reality version of what's in the real world and what's in the digital world at the same time. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Where it gets really weird and wonderful and wacky is when we start thinking about brain implants. And in the world of medical science, there's been a lot of research in this area over the last decade or so. Lots and lots of research institutes have been working on different kinds of memory chips to help people with Alzheimer's or dementia start to regain their memories. But most prominently, we have, once again, Elon Musk, who's out there with his Neuralink company. And he was first trying to look at how do we merge AI with the human brain. I think he's backed off on that a little bit. He now has been focusing much more on helping people who've had really severe spinal cord injuries to be able to walk again. He did an announcement just a few days ago where he showed some pigs that had these Neuralink implants, one of which had the implant removed to show that it was okay afterwards. But he's looking at things that also include controlling one's emotions and even silly things, or at least in my opinion, kind of silly, like streaming music directly into your head instead of listening to it from your computer or your smartphone or your stereo system or TV. But this is going to open up, again, a lot of new practice areas, and we're going to see whole new jobs of the future that include brain-machine interface specialists. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the whole world of medical science and precision medicine and what the future of humanity may look like. So I'd like to thank you very, very much for your time today, and I'll open the floor up to questions.
Shara, thanks very much for a very interesting presentation that certainly gets my head spinning a little bit. But thank you very much for that. I would invite the audience to use the chat function if they would like to submit some questions. And while the audience considers doing that, Shara, I've got a couple that I would like to pose to you. The first is to see if you have any worries that our new smart environment of the future could become too smart. In other words, are some of these advances worth the risks or vulnerabilities that come with it?
That is an excellent question. And in fact, when I think about artificial intelligence and I combine it with quantum computing, the reality is that AIs may become what we call a general intelligence rather than a very narrow focused single task. And it may happen sooner than many people think if quantum computing pans out the way it looks like it's starting to. We could end up with super smart computers, AIs, intelligences that start to become smarter and more capable even than human beings. And we need to be very careful with how we train these systems to make sure that they behave in ways that we as humans find acceptable to our society, that we teach them about emotional input and how humans work together and what's nice and what's not nice. When I think about things like brain implants that I was just talking about, I just sort of take a step back and say, I'm not going to be the first one who gets one of these. What happens if that brain implant chip was hacked? What are you going to do? Wipe your brain like you do a computer if your computer has been hacked or has malware on it? That's not possible to do. We don't even have technology that's in the works anywhere that could basically restore your brain if something went terribly wrong. And when it comes to things like nanobots, once again, I think there'll be another new job called a nanomedic that will be able to go in and help fix nanobots that may have gone amok. So there are always flip sides of technology and things that I talk about in more detail in some of my other speeches, but definitely could be a worry.
I'm trying to think of that brain chip, but I'll try to move on from that. Another question, do you have a recent example of a company or maybe even an industry that, in your view, is really getting this right in terms of converting into this new future digital world?
Well, look, there are a lot of companies that have really taken AI on board. One of them actually happens to be human resources. So if you think about talent management agencies, the way that they would have in the past tried to find appropriate staff members would have been through a series of entering keywords and looking at CVs and then just going through this whole trial and error and spending a lot of their time whittling down candidates, but not necessarily always catching people that might have appropriate skill sets but have different job titles than the title that they're looking for. And with the use of AI, and a lot of companies around the world are deploying this already, they're starting to automate this kind of system so that where the HR consultants are focusing their time is more on the human aspect of how does this particular person fit in with the company culture? You know, are they actually the right kind of candidate for a particular job role? Or when it comes to new jobs, let's say in artificial intelligence, if you try to find only candidates that have experience with AI or experience with Hyperloops or experience with brain machine implants, you're not going to find a whole lot of them. So what you need to do is find people who have the right kind of skill sets and interest to be able to be trained in these new technologies. So that's one example. I also see in the financial industry sector, and actually quite a few others, that they are deploying really smart chatbots to be able to take some of the load off of their customer support centers and answer routine questions very quickly using AI chatbots that have been taught with reinforcement learning about what's right and what's wrong, and then defer to a human when they get to a question that they have not been trained on or can't answer because they don't have that kind of information in their database. So those are just a couple of quick examples that come to mind.
Thank you. You have now spurred the questions from the audience, so I'm going to try to summarize a couple of these. They basically go like this. For law firms and other firms, accounting firms, investment banking firms that are in our World Services Group network, particularly with law firms, though, is where this question comes from. What sort of AI should we really be focused on? And the sort of the other side of that question is, what should we be sort of fearing about others who may be using AI and coming to steal business from law firms? That's a lot, but that's sort of a number of questions that are out there.
Okay, so one of the things that I would really suggest that AI could be beneficial in the here and now is in crunching through massive amounts of data. So let's say you have a bankruptcy law case. There are probably thousands of documents that attorneys will spend time reading through and digesting and analyzing, trying to figure out what the root cause of the bankruptcy actually happened to be. Well, big data and analysis of data is something that an AI is really good at, but you wouldn't want to just set the AI off by itself. So what you would do is you would use the AI to do the preliminary work, and then you'd have the attorney spend his or her time looking at the output from the AI. And if it doesn't look quite right, then they go back to their AI programmers and say, hey, we need some reinforcement learning here. It's giving us some wrong stuff. But this is an area that can make a law firm a lot more efficient and actually make it much more affordable for a client to be able to use your services and put you ahead of the game of other law firms that aren't using these kinds of techniques. Other things that a law firm could easily deploy would be chatbots to answer very commonly asked questions that come from their client base. And it can be customized to individual practice areas, and might be a whole slew of different chatbots that are designed for mergers and acquisitions, another one for bankruptcy, another one for new business, another one for international trade. And literally, these are technologies that involve AI that could be deployed today. And I think WSG could play a role in helping your members with developing and deploying these AIs so that every one of your members doesn't have to do it independently. If you do it collectively, it becomes a lot less expensive to do.
A quick follow-up on that. Are there some easy resources that you might be able to share with our audience in case we want to learn more about what's out there and what might be possible for our firms?
Absolutely. I've actually given links to the team to a couple of places on my websites where I have speeches about all kinds of things, the future of work, but I didn't give specific links on AI, but I've got lots and lots on AI. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn and have any questions, I will do my very, very best to answer or point you in the right direction. There are so many different newsletters and magazines and journals and podcasts that talk about all of these different technologies. But, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn and look at my posts, because I post all kinds of cool stuff that might be of interest to your audience.
That's terrific. And I'm told by our producer that somewhere on the screen in the resources box, you may have already supplied some of that information. One last question, and then we'll let you go on to the rest of your day or night. According to one of our more enlightened viewers, McKinsey has come out with a report that said that AI could cause the loss of 800 million jobs globally by the year 2030. And the question is, A, do you believe that? And then I guess B, if that happens, do you think there will be more jobs created than there are lost because of AI?
Well, I think right now, because of COVID, we don't want to look at AI in isolation. We need to also consider what's happening in the world with the pandemic. But let's just say the pandemic wasn't happening. Automation, whether it's AI, robots, definitely will impact jobs, but will also create all kinds of new jobs. So think about robots, for example. If I think about a robot, we need somebody who's going to design it. We need somebody who's going to train it or program it. We need people who are going to maintain it. We need people who are going to sell it. We need people who are going to service it and help it learn its new environment. So yes, jobs will go away, but other ones will come up. A lot of jobs will require digital literacy, not necessarily coding stuff, but being able to work with robots or AI or augmented reality or 3D printing. a lot of new jobs, especially, once we get past this hurdle of COVID and we start getting into the world of space travel. Oh my gosh, the jobs just out of that are going to be amazing. And the work for law firms coming out of that area is going to be absolutely huge, through the roof.
Well, Shara, thank you for taking time to make this global presentation as the keynote for our symposium. You've certainly given us a lot of things to think about. And again, thank you for your presentation. Have a good rest of your day.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, and thank you, everyone. I wish I could see everybody in the audience. I love going into live crowds, and over here in Sydney, it's getting close to midnight, so my next task will probably be getting ready for tomorrow. But I hope you have a wonderful symposium and that everyone gets a lot out of the next couple of days. Thank you, WSG, again, for inviting me to be your opening keynote speaker. It has been my absolute pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, and cheers.